The matters surrounding the Integrity Commission again. We have with us member of the GLP's Communication Task Force, Senator Marlon Morgan, and political commentator and editor-in-chief at the Western Mirror, Lloyd B. Smith. Good evening, gentlemen.
Evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening to you both. Let's start with you, Marlon Morgan. Your colleagues in the Senate and the lower house raised some concerns. The Integrity Commission chairman is suggesting that based on what was provided to her, she does not feel there's enough information for her to move forward with either an inquiry.
Well, at the very outset, Siobhan, I'd want to indicate that the correspondence written by jointly the leader of government business in the Senate and, of course, the lower house does not essentially seek to castigate or impugn the Integrity Commission. We know that conversations like these may conjure up in the mind of some that the JLP is fighting against the Integrity Commission. That is not the case. We respect the Integrity Commission as a commission of the Parliament, and we appreciate the role that it has to play in our body politic. Suffice it to say, however, having regard to the correspondence from the Integrity Commission over the signature of the newly minted chairman, retired Justice Carol Lawrence Beswick, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and, of course, the Minister of Tourism will be considering the correspondence and make a determination as to their response, because we know that it is in the public's interest in this matter for there to be appropriate ventilation, because for the avoidance of any doubt, the Integrity Commission is too crucial a commission in terms of serving as guardians of accountability and, faithful stewardship in high office. We know that Jamaica has been bedeviled by allegations of and perceptions vis-a-vis corruption, and as such, we know the role the Integrity Commission plays, the fact that the declarations have to be certified and that kind of thing. And so that is welcomed. However, we believe that it has to be, a premium has to be placed on ensuring that the persons who staff the commission are persons who are essentially divest of any perception of a conflict of interest. And what do I mean by that? We note in this case that based on Dr. Dayton Campbell's own assertions, the gentleman who has recently been elevated to act as Director of Corruption Prosecution at the Integrity Commission, Mr. Ronif Lawrence, against whom we cast no aspersions. We in the JLP do not impugn the gentleman's professional qualifications. What we're simply saying here is having regard to the fact that the Director of Corruption Prosecution will be called on from time to time to make critical decisions and determinations. We would not want any specter or any notion of bias or sympathies toward Dr. Campbell based on the relationship that the two gentlemen have, based on Dr. Campbell's own assertion. They are brothers essentially over 20 years of friendship as having been persons associated with Chancellor Hall and the Mona campus. So just to be very clear, we do not impugn the capacity of Ronif Lawrence, but we would not want to have a situation where members of the public looking on would have any notion of bias having regard to any decision or non-decision taken by Ronif Lawrence in his capacity as Director of Corruption Prosecution, albeit acting at this time.
Thank you, Senator Morgan. And Lloyd B. Smith, from your own perspective, what do you see as the best way forward now that the members, the leaders of both houses of the government have received a response from the chair of the Integrity Commission?
Well, first of all, I think that the chairman's response was most judicious and full of much common sense. And against that backdrop, I would want to think that the JLP should be cautious in what it is doing. And I say this against the backdrop that we are a very small society. Everybody knows just about everybody. And we have to be careful, therefore, that we do not reach a point in our political architecture where it's not going to be easy for us to find maybe a Mother Teresa or a John the Baptist. I mean, all of us, by association, whether socially, professionally, or otherwise, or politically for that matter, exist in a very small space. So I think that has to be borne in mind. I would want to go along with the suggestion of Milady in that more evidence should be put on the table as to why. Because it's interesting that Senator Morgan says that they do not question this gentleman's professionalism. And in my books, when you act professionally in the
professional qualifications, actually.
Oh, you meant qualification, because I was going to say that when you act professionsionally, then you are...
Yeah, because I don't know that I'm in a position to speak definitively as to his professionalism.
Mm-hmm. So you're just speaking of his Okay, well, at least you clarified that in my mind. But I still think that there would need to be more cogent evidence to bring this matter to closure, because are you saying in essence that he ought not to be placed in that position in the very final analysis? Is that what is being said? Because that is not clear to me. Or you're just raising this objection purely for political mileage, or,
So just for the avoidance of any doubt, Siobhan, Prof. Hope, and of course my good friend Lloyd B., the JLPs, and of course by way of the correspondence from Kamina Johnson-Smith and Edmund Bartlett, is not raising an issue for any political mileage, because that would do the public conversation a disservice. Indeed, that would do the interest of the public and governance in the country a disservice. And so we would not even suggest or want the suggestion to be inferred, yes, that is what is driving the considerations and the requests here. What we're standing on is a platform of wanting to see the Integrity Commission being above board, being staffed by persons who are not only professional and well suited to serve, but there is no question, as it were, as to their impartiality and, of course, their judgment and the fact that they have no conflict of interest. That's a clear point we're making here. So one of the things we shouldn't avoid or discount in this conversation, lady and gentlemen, is the context within which we're operating. Lloyd B. will appreciate very well that for the past 3 or so years, what we have had is essentially a weaponization of the IC. No fault of the IC in terms of, what the PNP has done in relation to the matter of the Prime Minister's statutory declarations not being certified. Certainly when the PNP started to raise this on the political stump, that would not have been a fault of the IC. However, what we have seen is a weaponization of the IC's work, and especially in circumstances where Julian Robinson said what he said in August of 2024, where he essentially, on the occasion of speaking at the PNP Women's Movement Conference on August 17 or 18 of 2024, he basically telegraphed to listeners and the public at large that we're likely to have elections later in 2024, because when Parliament resumes, he said, in September, a report from the Integrity Commission will be tabled. How would Julian Robinson have known that? Now, certainly, we are not suggesting that any particular officer at the IC may have tipped off Julian Robinson, and indeed Dayton Campbell, who appeared on Nationwide sometime in early September, and essentially challenged what Cliff and I believe Ricardo Brooks at the time were saying when they were speaking about the accounts of Mr. Holness's parents. Dayton Campbell on that program made mention of the findings of the IC or this issue being about much more than Andrew Holness's parents' bank accounts. What would have caused Dayton Campbell to have been in such a position to speak so definitively and conclusively on that matter? These things raises questions in the minds of the public, and it may serve to erode public confidence in this institution in which such high responsibility and expectations are vested. And that's a key point we're making. Too much is at stake with the IC for there to be any whiff or any hint of untoward or improper motive in terms of the carriage of its mandate. And we have seen copious examples that erode public confidence, not least being the comments of the incumbent executive director at the IC, Greg Christie, on the occasion of the shooting of an IC staffer, where the journalist put a question to him and Greg Christie retorted in no uncertain terms, asked the government that. And when the journalist taken aback, asked him what does he mean by that. Greg Christie responded to the journalist and said, ask them what that means.
Senator Morgan, we have to bring Lloyd B back into the conversation, yes, because of course, when you speak about the kind of scrutiny that the Integrity Commission has been under over the past year or so, the public has become very embroiled and connected to the conversations around it, and so Lloyd B, what do you think, or how do you think the move forward to appoint individuals to these positions in the IC has to be treated, especially within the kind of political climate that we are working through right now? We are looking at an election sometime soon.
Well, I think due diligence has to be done.
Yes.
Sufficient interrogations and so on must be done. What is unfortunate at this point is that the matter is now being tested and tried in the court of public opinion. And that is where I have a difficulty because, as I said before, we are a small society, and the very fact that this issue has now been raised, it would have put the gentleman in question into a most, invidious position. And I don't know if that is fair to him. And so I would have thought that there would have to be more subtle and, behind the scenes way in which the dialogue could have taken place. And as the milady has suggested, that in instances where in the future certain cases may come to the fore, that if necessary he would recuse himself from those matters so as not to leave any cloud of suspicion or uncertainty. Because I do believe, as I said, that it's going to be extremely difficult in the very finance. Because today it is the JLP saying this. Tomorrow it could be the PMP saying the very same thing about another person in another position within the IC. So I think a great deal of care has to be taken here. And what I would love to see is greater dialogue, as well as what Milady suggested, that Marlon here has given us a number of instances which he believes substantiate the JLP's position. I don't know if these were put within the context of his, or rather the letter that was sent by Mr. Bartlett and Minister Smith. But I think in the very finances, much more needs to be done behind the scenes quietly, rather than using this thing, the public sphere, to deal with it, because we know right now in this silly season there's heightened political rivalry, and no matter how you spin this thing, Marlon is going to come across as a potential witch hunt. That's how I see it.
But Mr. Lloyd B, the concern there raised regarding the necessity to deal with these matters quietly, isn't that abundantly the problem as it stands now? Because up to this point, the Integrity Commission has operated somewhat in a very closed-door manner, providing very little in terms of the way of information to the public as to its operations. And that itself has fostered this almost suspicion from certain aspects of the political directorate as well as the general public. Shouldn't there be at least an acknowledgement on the part of the Commission that there are concerns on the part of the political directorate and the people, and that they will be looking into them?
Yes, your point may well be taken, but this is why we could extend this to taking the whole matter of the gag clause, and then we would be entering another domain of political intrigue and obfuscation. I will maintain that the Integrity Commission, to me, it has to be seen as removed somewhat from, the general discourse in the political arena, because otherwise it will continue to be a political football, and it will be hit on either side, depending on who is in power and who is not in power, depending on, that's how I see it. And I frankly believe, as I said, that at this stage, the matter could have been dealt with privately behind, and then if at some point there was no resolution satisfactory, then you could go into the public domain. The fact that it is now thrust into the public domain, I don't see it having any resolution that is going to be totally favorable, unless, of course, the goodly gentleman resigns from the post. What else is the JLP asking for? Is that what the JLP really wants? Say so, then you take it from there.
But I ask you, Lord B, can he operate in a position, as you said, where he would be required, due to the concerns raised by the government, that his affiliations with Dr. Dayton Campbell may call into question his ability to deal with the political directorate in a fair manner? Would it then be possible for him to do his job? I mean, would he then have to recuse himself from any matter regarding a parliamentarian?
So this is why I'm asking, is it that the JLP is saying he should not be there? If that is the case, then say so. And then he would have his own constitutional right, and the matter may well have to be taken to the courts to have it resolved. I don't know. I mean...
Well, Siobhan, Lloyd B. would appreciate, and it is an observation made by retired Justice Lawrence Beswick, yes, in her correspondence of even date, regarding no entity or authority, separate and apart from the court, consequent on judicial review, should direct the Integrity Commission. And so the Jamaica Labour Party, for which I speak, is not arrogating unto itself a power to direct the IC in relation to the good gentleman, Mr. Ranif Lawrence. So just to be very clear, the correspondence of Friday last seeks essentially to invite the IC to attend upon this issue, to interrogate the circumstances surrounding this gentleman, Ranif Lawrence, and of course, an apparent relationship insofar as a friendship, a certain association between himself and a gentleman who serves as the CEO of one of the major political parties here in Jamaica, the PNP's Dayton Campbell. So just to be very clear, staffing is an issue that the IC has to pay particular attention to. We would have seen in recent months at one of the oversight committee meetings for the IC, Greg Christie, when a question was put to him about Ryan Evans, a gentleman who is known to have had, yes, and Ryan Evans does not deny it, certain antecedents in terms of having served as an advisor, political advisor as it were, to then Minister Dr. Peter Phillips. It should be that in staffing the Integrity Commission, in bringing members on board, takes, more definitive and careful steps to, consider the antecedents of persons, because you want the entity to be staffed by persons in whom there can be no question as to political sympathies or potential improper motive on the part of the person. Because you wouldn't want a member of the public to feel that, listen, Ryan Evans acted in this way, or Kevin Stevenson, or indeed Ranif Lawrence acted in a particular way because of something that was operating on their mind other than their good judgment and professionalism. And we have seen in the case of the IC where Mrs. Prince Kamika exercised the judgment in relation to not averring charges. Yes? However, based on what has come to public light, there are functionaries in the IC, yes, who would have had a variance of opinion from her, certainly Kevin Stevens, insofar as making a recommendation to her for charges in relation to wholeness and the issue of his parents' bank accounts. Kevin Stevenson was of one mind, and as we have since come to see, to recognize and appreciate, Mrs. Prince Kamika was of a different mind in terms of the likelihood of, successful prosecution and the premium of going in that direction. So you would not want to have decisions being taken by people to be open to the specter of bias or political sympathies in particular. And Ryan Evans, a gentleman who served as an advisor to Peter Phillips, really and truly in terms of the recruitment process, should have, been flagged and perhaps not considered for appointment, because you want the entity to be sterile and absolutely divest of any question on the
Senator Morgan, I think I hear Lloyd B saying this, and I did repeat this last Friday when the letter was discussed here on Nationwide, that Jamaica is a very small society, and the pool of persons that you're going to choose from for some of these high-profile positions tends to be people who may know each other casually, probably have attended school together, but let me make the point, and may have some kind of association with each other. Being an advisor to someone is at a different level, maybe from having a friendship with someone else or a casual relationship. So I think, how do you suggest then that we go forward to ensure that the kind of 360-degree evaluation is done so that persons coming into these posts are then free of any major attachment that might seemingly prejudice their own professionalism?
Which is why, Prof, I pointed to process. In other words, just for the benefit of the listeners to be very clear, what I am commending to the Integrity Commission, to the extent that it is an office that discharges an important mandate, and it has to be an entity that wins the trust and confidence of the public, is for it to have a fit and proper, a fit-for-purpose recruitment process where appropriate checks are made, appropriate inquiries are made as to persons' antecedents, because I am sure it would have popped up or ought to have popped up on Ryan Evans' resume that the gentleman, is essentially someone who had proximity to an active politician and perhaps would not be the best candidate to serve as the Director of Corruption Prevention at the Integrity Commission as he is serving today. And for Greg Christie to have responded to that question put to him at the oversight committee meeting in the way he did, I believe it leaves much to be desired, and it was essentially a slap in the face of members of the public in particular who have legitimate concerns and legitimate questions. We do not want to have an IC where there is this wedge where you have one segment of the population believing that, there are some persons who are staffing the IC who are not essentially fit for purpose, and another segment.
Senator Morgan, you're always going to have that. Let's be realistic here. As I said, you might as well suggest...
That's an excellent point, I'd be.
No,
that's an excellent point. We're always going to have that.
Yes.
No, let me allow you, because there's an observation I want to make. You're always going to have persons having, an angst or a grievance one way or another. However, it should not be undergirded by any, substantial evidence or what you would call, anything that has veracity, as it were. And I have cited examples in this case of some many instances and many developments in relation to the IC that strains confidence and serves to erode public trust in the entity. Not least some comments by Christie, not least the fact that it is alleged that Prince Kamika is someone who was, alienated perhaps, or persons took a dim view of her in the IC because she elected to not charge the Prime Minister in relation to the illicit enrichment matter, or indeed in relation to his parents' bank accounts.
And
these are real issues.
And Lloyd B, I would like to bring you in here, because is that an unfair request? As you put it, the IC should be above the political fracas in almost all doubts. It should be reasonably isolated from that level of scrutiny. So shouldn't it then be in a situation where the people who staff the Integrity Commission should be people to, at the very minimum, we cannot find, as the Senate put it, veracity in claims that they have prior links to of political affiliation?
Yes, but it is still a difficult proposition.
Yes, Lloyd, it is a difficult proposition, but it's a body similar to the judiciary. As put, it is the only body above it that the Integrity Commission takes instruction from, is the judiciary. A body that highly placed, do you not believe that it should face a higher level of scrutiny?
Absolutely, but the Honourable Justice Beswick has left the door open. She hasn't closed it on this matter. Her letter ends with all she's asking for is cogent and unequivocal information. No, the question that must be asked, can Senator Morgan, along with his colleagues, provide that information to the commission so that, her ladyship can act accordingly and the commission can then take the matter further. Just saying that he's a very good friend of Dr. Campbell, I don't know if that is sufficient for such, a monumental decision to be taken, which would mean that he would have to be fired. So all I'm saying here is we must tread softly, and sometimes diplomacy behind the scenes negotiations would have been better rather than thrusting this thing into the public domain at a time when partisan, flare-ups are now so common and everybody's pointing fingers at everybody. And I don't know if this issue can be sufficiently dealt with within the court of public opinion. That's my view.
But then I put it to you, Marlon Morgan. Mr. Lloyd B. raises a good point regarding what exactly is it that the JLP, or better yet, maybe say the government parliamentarians are after. Would you, and I put it specifically to you, not any other member of the parliamentarians, but you specifically, would you be comfortable as a senator having your statutory declarations and your matters relating to the conduct of your office be scrutinized by Ronnie Lawrence if he becomes the permanent appointment as Director of Corruption Prosecutions?
Well, I would respond in the affirmative by saying I would, because the idea is that the gentleman may be eminently qualified to serve as the Director of Corruption Prosecution at the IC. However, having regard to the information that we now have in terms of the close association between this gentleman and a person who has a certain political agenda, that being the PNP's General Secretary, I would perhaps have live and real concerns as to, yes, whether any decision taken by this gentleman in relation to matters brought or referred to his office by the Director of Investigation in relation to me as a parliamentarian is something that does not have untoward considerations operating on his mind. So in short, his sympathies to Dr. Campbell, real or perceived, and or malice or improper motive on his part. And what makes this matter that much more contentious, gentlemen and lady, is that the mere fact that this issue has been raised in the public domain as it has in recent days, it is all the more reason why serious interrogation has to be made by the IC into the incumbency, albeit acting, of Ronnie Lawrence. Because Ronnie Lawrence, based on even this very discussion now, may well have reasons to exhibit malice toward JLP parliamentarians, myself included. Now, thankfully, I can speak unequivocally and definitively that I will have and shall have nothing untoward in relation to my stewardship and my financial affairs, certainly in relation to any public office that would cause me, yes, to essentially be in any particular adverse spot. But just to be very clear, the public, I keep coming back to this point, the public has to have a degree of confidence in looking on that, listen, the IC is staffed and outfitted by persons who are operating above the political fray or above the political melee and fracas, using Lloyd B's own words.
Gentlemen, we have to move towards a wrap up, but as Lloyd B is saying, and as the letter from her ladyship is suggesting, Senator Morgan, the ball is now in the court of, the leaders of government business in the upper and lower house to provide the information, the cogent information, so that process that Senator Morgan you're asking for can be taken to some conclusion.
We appreciate that.
Yes.
We appreciate that, and I trust that Edmund Bartlett and Kamina Johnson-Smith will take the matter under advisement.
There's just one quick question I want to ask, though. I'm not sure about the center, but maybe you can enlighten my ignorance. Is it that this gentleman would unilaterally make any decision with respect to your statutory? Is there some way that these things would be sufficiently dealt with by the commission in totality and not just him?
That's an excellent question, Lloyd B. I know it's an excellent question. Keisha Prince Kamika would have brought her professionalism and her capacity and experience as a learned prosecutor to bear in making her determination, yes? However, we see that there are some folks, her former colleagues at the IC, who essentially took umbrage to the very thing that she did. And she did it not in an arbitrary way, but in a painstaking and professional way, I am prepared to submit.
Allegedly, Senator Morgan.
Yes, I think we have to, but there seems to be a lot more that we have to discuss around this issue.
That's an excellent
gentlemen.
question by Lloyd B.
Yes.
just now.
Yes.
Prince Kamika did what she did, and some people took exception and umbrage to it.
So the team is working in different directions in some instances, and perhaps you're suggesting that to clarify and ensure that for the way forward, the team works with more consensus, that the scrutiny is at the
They
highest
must
level.
respect the work of each other, because
Yes.
that is why the IC has been, constituted in the way it has. Kevin Stevens is the director of investigations. You can't be the head cook and bottle wash. You can't be the person who is judge, juror, and executioner. You undertake your investigation. You are to do your investigation without malice. And, of course, you come up with your findings and you make a referral to the director of corruption prosecution. That ball ends there, because it is now for the director of corruption prosecution to use his or her experience and expertise as a prosecutor to determine and come up with a ruling based on the evidence, not the figment of their imagination. Yes? So I would commend those words this evening to Kevin Stevenson.
But wouldn't any ruling be made be subject to redress?
You have redress by way of judicial review. It's the courts you have to seek redress, I see. Lloyd B, as Prime Minister Andrew Holness has done.
Indeed. So we may be beating our head against the wall in the analysis.
No. But and Lloyd B, gentlemen and lady, Lloyd B is making a very excellent point here again, because just for the benefit of the listeners, the rulings of the Director of Corruption Prosecution and indeed any other functionary of the IC is of considerable moment, because as we know, separate and apart from successful prosecution, just the mere notion of being charged can be very perilous in the body politic. If the Prime Minister, for example, were to be charged, it is something that is of a nature and on a scale that may topple a government. So although there is remedy at the court by way of judicial review, ladies and gentlemen, let's be very clear, the very ruling by the Director of Corruption Prosecution may be of considerable moment, because it may cause the position of an incumbent, whether it is opposition leader, Prime Minister, or a Minister of Government, yes, to become untenable. So it is not a light matter and a light issue. We have to understand what we're saying here. These are very serious office and very serious powers, folks, are vested in the Integrity Commission. We need to understand that. These people make rulings, and the rulings are of considerable moment, as we have seen in the case of Andrew Michael Holness. The director of investigation did a lot of editorializing in his report that were essentially aimed at, in our view, or at least in my view, raising all kinds of issues, and his findings did not establish impropriety on the part of the Prime Minister. He established no impropriety, and yet he did not elect to certify the gentleman's declarations. He instead invoked TAJ and invoked FID. And we believe, as the Prime Minister's judicial action is seeking to do, we believe that the IC, in the case of Kevin Stevenson, acted outside of its remit, acted ultra-vires.
And, well, Marlon, I think you have to be careful, though, because it's the
a charge, Lloyd B, can topple a government. Let us understand that. So Ronnie Florence can charge the Prime Minister tomorrow morning on any matter that comes to his desk that has the effect of making the Prime Minister's position untenable invariably, or any other person, myself included.
And what if it turns out that this is so? Wouldn't his position also become untenable?
Well, there you go. But the damage would have already been done, Lloyd B. Let us understand what is being communicated here.
Well, gentlemen.
If a person's position becomes
Marlon,
untenable based on arbitrary rulings, that's problematic. I'm guided, Siobhan. All the best, my brother.
Thank you.